Hey guys, it's me Shannon. This is part 11 of Was I in a Cult? Okay, so I left off at the part where me and Lena were going to church every Wednesday for the youth service, and her mom started giving her a problem about going to church because she was coming home late. And, as a teenager, and I mean, I was barely out of high school, so I kind of thought like she's just being controlling and whatever. It was just one of those things. But I mean, I didn't realize, obviously, I wasn't a parent, and so I wasn't being able to see it from a parent's point of view, that why would a church keep kids up so late, knowing that they have to go to school the next day, knowing that in the morning they were going to need to try to get up at like 6, 7, or 8 o'clock in the morning after not coming home until like 11 o'clock at night, and probably getting to bed somewhere around 12. And like, they thought like, why can't the church have the services earlier? Like, why can't they start at 6 and end at 8? Or, or at least minimize the fact that sometimes it went way over schedule. Like, it was supposed to end at 9, but it wasn't ending until 9:30, and then by the time everybody went out, they all wanted to hang out with each other and eat or fellowship or whatever and talk to people after church. And then that led into it being where kids weren't leaving until like 10, weren't coming home till like 10:30, because probably some of the kids were 30 minutes away. And so my friend coming home at 10:30 was just not okay. So like, Lena's mom just finally got so upset, and she was just like, you're done, you're not going to church anymore, like, we're not having this argument anymore. So she stopped coming to church. And so I felt so bad, and I thought, well, every Wednesday after church I'll go to her house and I'll tell her about the sermon, and tell her everything that happened, and we could have like our own little Bible study. And I mean, obviously it wasn't like I was like, hey, let's have Bible study. It was like, I'll just come over, like, after church and stuff like that sometimes, or okay, I just thought of something. I'm pretty sure I didn't come over that same night, because obviously I was getting home from church at like 11 o'clock, and there was no way I was going to somebody's house that late. So it was probably like the next day, like every Thursday, like the day after church, I would go and like give the rundown of what happened at church, and then I would take notes at church, because I was already being instructed to, like, oh, why don't you bring, like a notepad? Or I started to see other people that had notepads, and I started taking notes in church about like the sermon stuff. So I would take those notes over to Lena's house, and we would all sit down at a table, her and her sister and me, and we would start going over the notes from the sermon, and I would explain and kind of like re-preach what the pastor said. And we would just go over all of that and do this like every week after, like the day after the services. So when I look back at it, actually this was probably the most healthy part of what I got out of this, is because I felt like what I was doing was actually getting together with these two girls, and I wasn't just telling them like, this is what you should do or whatever. I was like, hey, look, let's all get our Bibles. So we would all have our Bibles, and then they would have their notes, and then we would read the scriptures that, the main thing that I would take from the notes was the scriptures. I wasn't always putting down like everything that the pastor was telling us to do, but my understanding was to take the scriptures and actually try to apply those scriptures in a practical way in our lives, which I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just that, like, what happens is that in that church, what was happening is that sometimes pastors and leaders were taking certain scriptures and using those scriptures out of context and using it to control the people. And that's not the way we were using them. When we were talking about the scriptures, we would talk about them and we would be able to relate to like maybe something and then maybe apply it to our own lives in that way, without someone telling us that I don't know how to explain what I'm saying. I guess what I'm saying is that instead of like preaching what I thought that the scripture meant and what I thought people should do with that scripture in their lives, I instead was just like, let's all look at this for our own lives and then see how we could apply it individually ourselves. Like, in other words, like, you know, it wasn't like me just telling them what to do. It was like me putting forth the scripture, and then we were all able to talk about it and like talk about, like, I could talk about well, what I feel that I need to do according to the scripture is this, this, and that. You know what I mean? Because I feel like this is what's going on in my life, and this is how this scripture applies to my life. And then they would do the same. And so it was more of an interaction rather than like the pastor or leader telling us what to do, and how to take and use that scripture, if that makes sense. Now, obviously, I wasn't fully indoctrinated at that point, so I didn't know how sometimes scripture was used to manipulate people, and I had like this new freshness where I was just like learning, so I wasn't manipulating anyone, and nobody was I didn't realize that I was being manipulated any way either. But the times of manipulation came when we went to the youth service, and then after the youth service, the ones that are like considered appointed leaders over us or whatever, when they would have like little meetings with us, or they would talk to us after church, and they'd act like they were just coming up to us to you know, make friends and stuff like that. But sometimes it seemed like there was always like some sort of ulterior motive for them being our friends. Like, in other words, like they would come up and they'd be like, you know, oh, hi, how are you? You know, like, how'd you like the service or whatever? And they knew you were new, right? So they were specifically, certain leaders were going after certain new people, and like they would really just zone in on them and be like, you know, oh, hey, so you're coming this week, this Friday, right, to the prayer service, or you're coming this Sunday, right? Why don't you come sit with us? You know, like, come sit with us and we'll all hang out. And it was like, there was always these different leaders wanting us to go sit with them. And I thought it was just them being like, you know, trying to be welcoming and stuff like that. And I remember at one point in time, after I had gone for a little while, I remember one of the leaders coming to me and saying, how come you never sit with the youth on Sundays? Like, you're a part of the youth ministry. And I was like, what do they mean I'm a part of it? Like, I never said I was a part of, or like I was like, you know, designating myself as a youth. At that time I was like 18 going on 19, so I was like, I'm an adult, you know what I mean? Like, I go to the youth service because I enjoy it, but that doesn't mean I'm like want to just like only associate with the youth and only sit with the youth. It was kind of like the church was breaking off in cliques, and it was like all the people that were in the youth ministry sat with the youth, and then there was like the young adults that all got together for their young adult thing on Thursday, and then they sat together, and then like the home sat together, and then like the men's home and the women's home, they had their own section of the church, and nobody else was allowed to sit in that section because that's where they sat. And on the opposite side is where the youth sat, you know, and then in the middle was where like some of like the adults sat, you know, and like different Bible studies, they would try to get their Bible study to all sit together in one little area. And it was kind of like they were all in this competition to see like what ministry had the most people, and that's why they wanted people to sit in their section, because then the preacher or the leaders and the pastor could actually see sort of like a head count of like, you know, so that he could see like, oh, well, this ministry, they need help because they don't have anybody sitting with them, or like, you know, I don't know. It was like about a numbers game, and I didn't even realize that at the time. Doing these videos is actually even revealing more stuff to myself that I didn't even realize before until I started talking about it. But I am almost out of time. I'm already just down to like 10 seconds left. So I'm sorry that this is so long, and there's going to be a part 12. I will see you soon in part 12. Have a good night.